Hello there, this is Instructor Paul, and in this lecture, I'm going to talk to you about Windows trusts and help you understand what they are and how they work. So before we get started, let's quickly talk about what a Windows domain is. Now, like you know, a Windows domain is a collection of resources, user accounts, computers, and printers, and that kind of thing. So if I have my domain instructorpaul.com or itflea.com, then I'm generally going to have user accounts and computers that are associated with that domain. It can also be printers and other types of resources. Okay, so now that we've refreshed on what a domain is, let's talk about what is a trust. Now, a trust allows users in one domain to access resources in another domain. Now, that's at the most basic level. There's three main components that define a trust. There's the type of the trust, there's transitivity, and then there's the direction of the trust. Okay, so let's talk more about the type of trust. Now, the first type that we have here is the parent-child type. And this is a trust that's automatically created if you add a subdomain. So if I have domain A that you can see in this picture, and I create domain D, and it's a subdomain to domain A, then there will be an automatic two-way transitive trust that will be created between domain A and domain D. And this would be a parent-child trust. So if I have instructorpaul.com and I add a subdomain called courses.instructorpaul.com, that would be a two-way transitive trust automatically created between instructorpaul.com and courses.instructorpaul.com. Okay? Next, we have a tree root trust, which is also automatically created when a new tree root domain is added to an existing forest. Now, these trusts are transitive two-way trusts, just like the parent-child. Next, we have a shortcut trust that are manually created and only exist within a specific forest. They're created to optimize the authentication process, and these trusts are transitive, and they can be either one way or two way. So here in this picture on the right-hand side, we can see that we have domain A, domain B, and domain C. Now we're going to talk more about transitivity later on, but let's say that all these domains trust each other, okay? And let's say that domain D needs to authenticate a user from domain C. Well, it would have to go to domain A and then over domain B and then over to domain C. You could create a shortcut trust that will allow this domain to skip all these and go directly to domain C. Okay, so that's the purpose of a shortcut trust. It literally is just making the authentication process faster, okay? Now, a forest trust is just like it sounds. It allows you to establish either a one-way or two-way trust between two Active Directory forests. As a side note, a forest, if you don't already know, is a collection of trees. Just like if you were to go outside in the forest, you'd expect to see more than one tree. And a tree is a collection of domains, just kind of like what we have in this picture here. Next, we can have an external trust, and these are non-transitive one-way trusts that are used to access resources in NT 4.0 domain or a domain in another forest that does not have a forest trust established. So you can create these external trusts, between two different domains that, aren't trusting, or the forests don't trust each other. Now, finally, you can have a realm trust, and these are used to access resources between a non-Windows Kerberos version 5 realm and an Active Directory domain. Now, Kerberos is a network authentication protocol. You can learn more about the Kerberos authentication if you're interested. There's a link down below under the resources of this lecture. If you're interested, it's kind of out of the scope of this lecture, but if you're interested in realms, you can learn about that by clicking the link below. Now, let's talk about transitivity. First, there's two things you need to learn about transitivity. You have transitive trust and non-transitive trust. A transitive trust means that the trust can be extended beyond the two domains for which the domain or the trust was established. For example, if domain A establishes a trust with domain B, and that is a transitive trust, and domain B also has a trust established with domain C, then users in domain C could be used to access resources in domain A if the appropriate permissions were configured. So if domain A trusts domain B and domain B trusts domain C, then that means domain A also trusts domain C. Okay, so when you set up a transitive trust, you're not only saying, hey, domain A is going to transitively trust domain B, we're also going to trust all the domains that domain B trusts. Okay, now on the other hand, if I establish a non-transitive trust between domain A and domain B, it wouldn't matter what domains that domain B trust. My non-transitive trust will only allow users in domain B to access resources in domain A. So non-transitive is a more restrictive way to establish a trust between a domain. Now let's talk about trust direction and flow. You can have a one-way trust, which in the picture on the right-hand side of the screen, we have domain A, which has established a one-way trust with domain B. That means users in domain B could be used to access resources in domain A, but users in domain A could not be used to access resources in domain B. If we have a two-way trust, that means users in either domain can be used in the other domain to access resources. So domain A can be used in domain B, and domain B could be used in domain A. Now, here are all the possible trust combinations that we talked about. Here we have the trust types, which is what we talked about earlier: parent, child, tree, root, shortcut, forest, external, realm. And then we have the characteristics, which is a transitivity, could be a better heading for that. So we have transitive, non-transitive, and then there's some that could be, transitive or non-transitive. And then we have the direction, which is two-way, one-way, or it could be two-way or one-way. Okay. Then we have the authentication mechanism, which isn't too important for you to know off the top of your head. Kerberos version 5 is what we talked about earlier. And then NTLM would be the authentication mechanism that Active Directory uses. Okay. So you can create an external trust. It has to be one way. It can't be transitive, and it only works with Active Directory. Okay. And then we have some notes, additional information here. Again, this is all included in the resources of this lecture if you're interested in reading or seeing this more closely. Okay, so that is all that I have for you in this lecture. Great job getting through this one, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next lecture.